25th, and we're here for the regular meeting of the Education and Neighborhoods Committee. I'm Paul Krikorian. I'm joined by the Honorable Dennis Zine, and we have 5 matters on the agenda today. For your planning purposes, all 5 of these items are discussion only. There will not be an action taken on any of the 5 of these. These are all 5 matters that are referred to this committee because they were part of the budget plan and have been referred by the council for further consideration by this committee. So we'll begin the discussion today. We'll hear some public comment on these items. We will expect staff reports on these items later. There certainly hasn't been time to prepare staff reports in the time since the council referred it to this committee. So today is to have an initial discussion about these items, take some public comment, frame the issues a little bit, and we'll have further discussion about them when we have a proper staff report on each of them. We'll consider action then. 3 of the items are related to neighborhood council elections. So I'm going to take all 3 of those items up together for consideration. And before we get to that, though, I do want to take item 3 out of order because we have representative of the fire department here who I would like to have the opportunity to come up and talk and get back on duty as quickly as possible. So we're going to take that one out of order. As usual, general public comment will be taken at the conclusion of the agenda items, and we'll be initiating the discussion of each agenda item and then having item-specific public comment following the discussion with staff. So with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Powell to introduce item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is a verbal discussion relative to the steps needed to mandate that every neighborhood council is a CERT team, and what portion of the funding for neighborhood councils would be needed to cover additional expenses related to training.
All right, and to start, if I could ask Mr. Kim to come forward. This matter was a recommendation that was discussed in the Budget Committee, the possibility of requiring that each neighborhood council become a CERT team. And I'd like to start, and Captain, if you could come up too, and introduce yourself, please.
My name is Al Poyer. I'm the Disaster Preparedness Officer for the Los Angeles Fire Department, and one of my responsibilities is supervising the delivery of the CERT training program for the city.
Welcome, and thank you for your service. Let's start, if we could, Mr. Kim, if you could talk about the current state of the law in terms of the relationship between neighborhood councils and disaster preparedness, and particularly what ordinance changes would be necessary, and maybe this might be directed to the city attorney as well. What ordinance changes would be necessary to meet this requirement? What are the steps that would need to be done in order to ensure that neighborhood councils could fill this role? And what budget would there be for it?
Thank you. Bangwan Kim, General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. We've been conducting some focus groups with emergency management and the fire department and neighborhood councils in response to a lot of interest in terms of neighborhood councils getting more involved with the CERT program. So I'll defer to the city attorney because they raised a kind of legal ordinance issue. And my understanding of it is that, according to charter, the role of neighborhood council board members is to advise city government. When they start getting involved in the implementation of services that goes beyond what current ordinances allow neighborhood councils to do. However, if they're wearing their CERT trainee hat, they could pretty much do the services that are expected as a CERT trainee, so they more or less have to wear different hats. And as soon as they start wearing the formal hat of a neighborhood council and get involved in CERT activities, that there are some legal issues with that. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of neighborhood councils that are interested and have actually been training hundreds of CERT people citywide. And I've been encouraging as many neighborhood councils as possible to get involved in CERT activities. They've been sponsoring workshops. They've been using their funds to pay for trainings by buying food, conducting outreach. Some neighborhood councils have been training hundreds of CERT trainees. So I think there's a lot of potential. The question of mandating their funds and requiring them to actually fulfill that role is obviously a city council decision.
Captain, what has been your experience in dealing with neighborhood councils, and how might we integrate the neighborhood council system more effectively, if you think we should, in the emergency preparedness process?
Well, our perspective, my perspective, and the fire department shares that perspective. And I've worked with Mr. Kim. We've talked about this same issue. I think it's an outstanding opportunity to integrate emergency preparedness throughout the city. I believe we have 93 neighborhood councils at this time.
And counting.
And it's growing tremendously. There's already a lot of cross-pollination between neighborhood councils and CERT. Many of the neighborhood councils have people who have gone through the CERT training. It's a more complex problem than what we simply have here, where it's say the feasibility of mandating that the neighborhood council have a CERT team really is probably a hard line. Encouraging that they have a CERT team, affording them that opportunity. What we'd have to do initially is survey how many people on each of the neighborhood councils have already gone through the CERT training and who are interested in being part of the CERT call-out team. Although we deliver the program to about 4,000 people on average throughout the city each year, we only have about 200 actively on the call-out. There's a large portion of people who want to take the CERT training to prepare their family, prepare for their neighborhood, who aren't really interested in being part of the call-out roster for the Los Angeles Fire Department. That being said, if we took all 93 neighborhood councils and we wanted to offer that training to them, and we chose the communities and hypothetically took 4 or 5 or 6 of those neighborhood councils and afforded a geographically feasible location to offer that training, and we did 20 deliveries of the CERT curriculum, we could have that done in a few weeks. It's very feasible, it's very affordable, and when I say that, I'm saying somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $50,000 worth of funding for fire department staff to go out and offer that training. But I think it's an outstanding opportunity to integrate disaster preparedness in our neighborhood councils, more so than we already have, because they're very interested.
Yes, it does. In that the CERT teams are volunteer based and require a tremendous personal commitment of time just for the training and in order to be willing to be called out, as you say. Is there? Do you see a tactical or morale problem or any of those sorts of problems in the team if you're mandating participation as opposed to recruiting people who are self-motivated to prepare themselves for emergency response?
And that's the conundrum: is can you force somebody that is interested in participating in their community through the neighborhood council endeavor? Can you force them to do additional training and additional commitment? And when I gave you that dollar figure and I talked about that training, most of the training that we offer with our staff out there at the CERT unit is offered on a business hour basis during the week. I can have my staff can one day a week offer it at nighttime, and I can flex their schedule and sometimes on weekends, but we just don't have the funding to do that on a regular basis. My expectation is most of the people on the neighborhood council have jobs and they have responsibilities during the week. So that funding would go towards affording our staff an opportunity to teach at night and teach on the weekends, and it would accomplish a task in a faster period of time. The one thing I want to make sure everybody understands, and I think most of the audience probably understands already because they're so involved, is that the CERT team and the CERT call-out are two different things. You can have a CERT team within your community or within your neighborhood that is designed to basically take care of you and your neighbors in your neighborhood, which really doesn't require much of a commitment. And then there's the call-out team that the fire department has with an additional 200 people that are interested in actually participating in emergency endeavors and other endeavors within the fire department. And we're trying to foster and grow that program more so right now. The challenge is keeping people interested. They have a tendency, and this is a national issue, not just here in Los Angeles, they have a tendency to become disenfranchised. The people that call it a catch and release program, because you are offered the CERT training and you go through the 17.5-hour curriculum and it's interesting to you and stimulating and you want to participate, but if there's not a disaster, how do you maintain that skill set, or how do you remain interested? And that's a challenge for me. That's something that I'm very interested in. So if they're not on the call-out roster and they're not involved with the fire department, how do you keep those people interested in maintaining those disaster skills? So there might be a provision for having an ongoing annual refresher training that we offer for our call-out roster, providing a small amount of funding so that we can, as a fire department, go out and offer that training to those different communities on an annual basis, just to make sure they're somewhat involved and find other ways to keep them interested.
So would it be fair to say then that the working relationship between the fire department and the neighborhood councils right now is, on the whole, a positive one, and that if we had broader training availability for more participation, we could significantly boost CERT participation among neighborhood council participants?
I would say that our relationship is good right now. I think there's an overwhelming opportunity for better collaboration and growth and involvement, particularly because the speed with which the neighborhood council program has grown. Mm-hmm. It's gone from this small program to 93 neighborhood councils that are meeting on a regular basis. And just recently, I've had active discussions with our fire chief and our chief deputies related to a mechanism to have better engagement between our uniformed staff and the neighborhood councils, because I think it's a tremendous opportunity to partner with the community in disaster preparedness and in a lot of other endeavors.
Thank you. Mr. Zine?
A couple, Captain, regarding the cost for training. The LAPD has a reserve program with their police officers.
Yes.
They've now taken those reserve officers and trained them to be trainers. So there's a number of reserve officers who are business folks, and they work during the day and they do train on the weekends. So what the police department has done, since they don't have the staff to pay overtime to do that, is to have the reserve officers, who are a cadre of training officers, do the training. Has the fire department ever considered that, taking your CERT people who are well trained and have them trained? I know that you must have a small staff in the CERT program that obviously works a certain. Do you work strictly CERT, or do you work other activities?
I'm the disaster preparedness officer. The captain that runs our CERT program is Stacy Gerlich, and she has 7 firefighters, and I'm basically their supervisor. But I work out of the emergency management department predominantly, writing emergency plans and annexes and working with the emergency preparedness coordinators from the other city agencies. But I'm actively involved in the CERT.
But most of your activity is daytime?
Yes, sir.
And same thing with the staff?
It's a 4-10 schedule, yes, sir.
Okay, and so to work on a weekend or an evening hour or whatever would be overtime?
Yes, sir.
Which I know the department is curtailing to a great deal. What if they were to, because I think the program's great, and people who want to get involved in CERT, it's a wonderful opportunity for them, their community. When the train crashed, the Metrolink, there were a lot of CERT members up there that were helping out, so we want to participate and get them involved. And I'm wondering, since when I met with the fire chief today and we were talking about budgets once again, what about having some CERT folk, just like the police department did with the reserves, that train other reserves, and they've taken the sworn staff out, whether it be training for firearms, training for vehicle operation, whatever the case may be, to have a core of CERT members who are proficient and have them do this training, say on nights or weekends or whatever, because I understand the cost factor. And I don't know if the neighborhood councils have the funds, since their funds have been reduced also, to pay for that. I'm trying to find a way how we can accomplish this for the benefit of the people in the city, and as you say, keep them involved, because they talk about perishable skills with the police department, perishable skills, and you need to be retrained on perishable skills. So if you go to the CERT training and you haven't done anything in a couple of years, they're going to forget it. Just like the defibrillator, you've got to have training and know what it's about. Have they ever considered anything like that to help in a short gap, since we don't have the funds to really provide? And taken out of their funds, obviously, that's their discretion if they want to do it or not. How about that?
It's a very feasible question, and we've had a lot of dialogue about that in the time period. I've been over there about 2 years. We've considered a lot of those options about different mechanism of affording that training. But it's not a simplistic answer where you can bring in somebody and afford. Number one, we have to afford the train the trainer curriculum,
right,
which essentially runs up the budget again is that we're offering Train the Trainer to train current CERT cadre, CERT volunteers to offer this training. And then we have scheduling, and then we have scheduling conflicts, and then we have the attrition rate of the volunteer. They go out and they teach their curriculum a couple of times and then perhaps lose interest. And these are all speculative hypotheses. The other option is that we offer it in our normal daytime schedule with some nighttime fluctuation and flexing schedule, but we can't offer it in the next 6-8 weeks. We talk to Mr. Kim and we run it into potentially next year's schedule, and over the course of the next 6, 8, 10 months, we offer that training to all the neighborhood councils, and that's feasible too without any additional budgetary constraints. And when I talk about training, whether it be reserve police officers or fire department explorer scouts, who we call reserves now, cadets, or CERT volunteers to deliver this training, now you get into a labor issue. And I've spoken to our labor folks in Scott Raid and Paul Weber over at PPL, and the issue is I have a captain and 7 firefighters who are full-time assigned to deliver this curriculum. They do it very well. They're very well thought of in the community. When they go out and do it, I get great feedback. And it becomes one other issue that I want to mention is the form over function. If we're talking about just getting the training out there and checking the box and saying that we train the neighborhood council, that's one thing, versus a uniformed firefighter who's been teaching this for a year, who has that skill set to teach the first aid and that fire safety and that rescue sort of curriculum from a hands-on approach and from a realistic perspective. I would feel as though you'd get probably quality training right now from our staff. There are probably a number of volunteers who could transition and learn that skill set and deliver it. But if you're talking about hitting the ground with your feet moving right now, you'd utilize the staff that we have.
Okay, but you have explored those other options.
We are currently exploring it, yes.
Okay. 'Cause I highly respect what you folks do, and I know that if it wasn't for the $54 million hit on your budget, that was a major deal that we had to go through with council. And until that economy improves, we'd rely on your services and that of the CERT team in case the disaster, because we see in the Midwest, they've got disaster, hundreds of people dying. What happened in Japan, I mean, I was at the train crash, so that was small in comparison to some of these other disasters. And we keep on saying we're going to have an earthquake, and we tell people be prepared for 72 hours because maybe people won't get there. But I mean, it's a critical program, and through the neighborhood council, at least we have the network through the 90-plus neighborhood councils. We have some network citywide that we didn't have years ago. Right. We had block captains, and that was scattered operations in different parts of the city, but at least we have a consistent program that we can communicate through those CERT folks to the neighbors. And then we have the ham watch, and we have ham radio operators, and we have one in the room here who can put his 2 in the room here, who could maybe 3 in the room here, who could help with that aspect. So I mean, I think over time we put things together in preparation for the big one, and God help us when the big one strikes. But I know from living here my entire life, we're a lot better prepared with the civilian population than we ever were in the past, and we've come a long way from where we were. And the neighborhood councils obviously have been a good part of that. But I can understand if we mandate it, you'll get resistance. But if it's offered as an opportunity, because some things you must sit down and be quiet, or please have a seat and pay attention. I mean, it's just the way we deliver it. And with the neighborhood councils and the relationship through that, and last year it was proposed that the department, neighborhood empowerment, be eliminated, which obviously you remember that. So I mean, we look, and Mr. Krikorian, my distinguished colleague, is the one that championed to keep it. Otherwise, who knows where you'd be right now? But I think it's a whole lot better. But to maintain it in those perishable skills as you teach them in that CERT training, they have to refresh on that. And if they haven't done it in a year or 2 years, it gets rusty. And then we need them for that purpose. So I think it's a good direction, and hopefully we can come up with some solution. But I thank you for what you're doing with that. So you working down at the fire station 4?
I work at my office is behind 88's.
Okay. Oh, in Sepulveda.
In Councilman Krikorian's district.
Okay.
And then I work out of 500 East Temple with the Emergency Management Department with Jim Featherstone most of the time.
All right.
I just wanted to emphasize that when I gave you that dollar figure, the reason I wanted to say that $25,000 to $50,000, and it's more realistically around $25,000, is because when I crunched those numbers before I came here today, I thought that was a pretty small figure. If we're talking about offering that training to all 93 neighborhood councils and getting it on board, and then perhaps exploring the option of one of those CERT folks doing the refresher training on their own exploring the factor of a volunteer, perhaps teaching that in the future, but to actually get it done now and get the program off the ground, I thought it was a pretty small number.
You're right. For 93, it's a very small number.
So I appreciate
Len
that.
Schaefer will start the bidding at $500. Mr. Schaefer. Glenn Bailey, another $1,000. We got $1,500.
Thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you.
Mr. Kim, you might as well stay there for the next item. And I think we're done, Captain, but thank you. We'll follow up. We're going to continue this matter in committee for further discussion when we have a actual report, and we can take some action at that time. But in any event, I like the direction that we're talking about going, and we'll be back to you on that. Thank you, Captain. Okay, folks, here's the dilemma I have. So far, 10 people have submitted cards, and I'm sure there will be more.
They're coming in right now.
Without exception, every single person who submitted a card wants to speak about all 5 items.
Yep.
That means that public comment alone, as I stand here with this in my hand, will take 2 hours, and we have 35 more minutes for this meeting. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go through these agenda items. The election items will all be consolidated as one item for purposes of discussion. Then we're going to talk about the encumbrance issue, and then I'd like to give you all a chance to come up and talk about, after you've heard what people have to say, give you all a chance to come up and provide public comment at that point. Unless there's a strong objection to that, that's the only way we're ever really going to be able to get through this and still hear from staff to the limited extent that we're going to be. Well, see, it just jumped to about 15 now, so that's the way we're going to have to proceed on this, because I do like to give everybody 2 minutes, and I don't want to cut you down to 30 seconds or something. That's pretty much what we'd have to do. So let's proceed then to items 1, 2, and 5, which are all dealing with the elections. And Mr. Powell, if you could introduce those matters.
One is a verbal discussion relative to alternatives to conducting neighborhood council elections. The other is a verbal discussion relative to tying neighborhood council elections to municipal elections. And then the last one is a verbal discussion relative to a review of the bylaws and recommendations for standardizing the factual basis stakeholder definition.
What happened to 4?
We're going to come back to 4. We're going to come back to 4 because it's a separate issue. These 3 are all related to elections. Right, so we've done 3, 1, 2, and 5 now, and then 4 will come next. Yes, but we're going to do all the public comment together in the interest of time. So take careful notes. All right, so... And by the way, I also wanted to mention their presence and welcome Commissioner Lux and Commissioner Davis, who are here. Thank you for being with us. All right, so we have had extensive discussion about neighborhood council elections in this committee, in the department, in the clerk's office, in the town halls that we've conducted, in our online surveys, within the neighborhood councils themselves. We have discussed this at very great length. I don't want to repeat that whole discussion, but there were questions raised during the budget committee and otherwise about how to deal with the neighborhood council election issue, and so I wanted to give us the opportunity to discuss it a little bit here. First of all, the budget for next year makes the assumption that neighborhood council elections will be postponed for
That is
the
correct,
election year.
because we were not budgeted any funds at all for that purpose.
So that being said, and by the way, I believe that is consistent with what the consensus view was that we received in our survey is that right, Irene? That the consensus view among neighborhood council participants was to do exactly that because of the cost involved. I know, Madam Clerk, that you haven't had much of an opportunity since the Budget Committee to further consider this, and we, as I say, we have discussed it already at great length, but just let's go over a couple of things briefly. We've discussed a lot of different models for how to do the election, and I'll open this up to all of you, really. Caucuses, online voting, all mail ballots, all online ballots. Given the current budget constraints that we have and the fact that the current budget is exactly zero for elections, what do you see as the viable options that we have, number one? And if we were to pursue some of those other alternatives, what comments do you have about how likely those options would be to increase participation and turnout with some of those alternative models?
All right. I'm June Lagnay, City Clerk's Office, and with me is Holly Walcott, our Executive Officer, and behind me is Chris Garcia, our Neighborhood Council elections expert par excellence. To summarize, it is true that the Budget and Finance Committee has recommended and the Council has adopted the go-forward budget for the 11-12 fiscal year. And among the many fiscal approvals, there were a number of requested report backs from the City Clerk. Two of them are exactly what are on your agenda. One, the study of alternatives to conducting neighborhood council elections, and the next item on your agenda, the study of feasibly tying neighborhood council elections to municipal elections. And quite accurately, as you have said, we are just now, we're still in canvass from our May 17th general runoff, and we just got through with the budget. So we are looking forward, come the July 1st of the new fiscal year. We know we have our work cut out for us. We have all kinds of good suggestions to look at. Some of them you've named: electronic voting, e-voting, internet voting, town hall caucus, or even the selection method, which is already built into each NC's bylaws. Each of them have their own sets of pros and cons, and we will lay them all out for you in that study, which will come back in a written form. Pretty much it's going to depend on what your committee decides is the best policy to recommend to council. And a lot of it also depends greatly on if and how extensively the neighborhood councils themselves answer critical basic questions like, do we define, do we have a unanimous concept of a factual basis stakeholder? Do we consent to have a pre-registration list? That we do not dictate what the NCs should do, but what is ultimately decided is going to extremely affect the outcome of the successful outcome of each of these alternative elections. Holly, do you have anything to add?
No, I think the importance is that tomorrow is our we run the final tally. So as June stated, I'm rather busy with the municipal election, and we know that, as you've stated, that there's quite a bit of work already been done. You know, we will meet with all parties and happy to work with everyone to make sure that everyone's concerns are heard and that the best possible solution is brought forward. But as far as laying out any pros and cons today, we're simply not ready.
And I think it should be noted that you have already done a tremendous amount of analysis of all these issues. There was the after-action report that was done after the last round of neighborhood council elections. There was all of the reports that you've done in response to this committee's request. So I think that body of work is largely already out there, and then just compiling it into a useful format that we can then report back to the rest of the council and to the budget committee on with specific policy proposals. We'll hold this on in committee until we have adequate time to be able to do that with, the complete input of the public as well, which we've done tremendous work in gathering already. I think an unprecedented amount of work in trying to draw input from the neighborhood councils and the general public on this issue. Mr. Kim, did you have anything further to add about elections?
Not extensively. I think I shared my views and recommendations during the Education Neighborhoods Committee meeting that you held on this very subject. But I would repeat, I think, what I recommended at that time, which is to work as closely as possible with the neighborhood councils during this assessment period, because they're the ones who have to live with the results of the city's decision. And it occurs to me that in past iterations of decisions around elections, that we weren't really viewing them as equal partners. And they bring as much insight into what works and what doesn't work as the city does. So we responded to requests from neighborhood councils to support their elections task force and came up with their own pros and cons based on the discussions that we have. And I think despite the fiscal crisis, I think there's an exciting opportunity that we have to use elections as a system-building opportunity where we raise awareness, increase participation, but try to involve the neighborhood councils as much as possible as partners, because as we all know, when you try to mandate something, you don't get as much participation and leadership from the neighborhoods as when you have buy-in and saying, yeah, this is something we want to do. We just want to figure out how to do it. So I think there is a great opportunity. There are, I don't know if you wanted to get into the factual basis stakeholder, but that would be another, if you want me to comment on that, I could offer some suggestions on that as well.
Why don't we hold your suggestions on that for the next meeting, because I'm going to want to hear the public comment on that exact point. And just for this, so everybody's clear on this, the agenda items specifically that we're addressing here at the request of the Budget Committee were alternatives to the clerks conducting neighborhood council elections, some of the ones we talked about. Whether neighborhood council elections should be tied to municipal elections in order to increase participation and turnout. And I suspect that the clerk's office will have some thoughts about whether that's practical, given the difference in precincts and so forth that there may be in that kind of an election. But again, we'll save that for another day when you've had a chance to analyze it. And then the final item on elections is standardization of the factual basis stakeholder definition. So during your public comment, I'd welcome all of your thoughts on those points. All right. Thank you very much. We will continue this matter and hold it in committee as well until we can have oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Zine. Did you have any questions that you wanted to raise?
We mentioned turnout. The last municipal election, the runoff, what was the percent turnout?
It was under double digits.
In the runoff.
Yeah.
It was 5%.
6%, 5.5.
5 what?
5.5, he said.
5.5%.
May I
in a municipal election.
proactively say, though, being that it was a school board seat and a community college district seat, all those costs were reimbursed by those entities?
No, not the cost. I know that was reimbursed, but my question was how many people were actually voting?
Gotcha.
And
People tend to show up when they,
Have an issue that they,
do we break it down absentee versus at the polls?
yes.
yes, but we don't have it with us today.
Don't have that?
I mean, I can get it to you, but I don't have it right now.
I'm just curious to see how that could mend with the neighborhood council elections. The by mail versus down the road versus the polling places, which seems to be an additional expense. But you folks do a very professional, strictly run election, which has to meet standards of the state and of the federal government. Neighborhood councils are a little more informal. So.
But the point about participation, I think, is an important one.
Absolutely.
Because that runoff election was not a meaningless election. These were contested races among serious candidates running for serious positions, and we got less than 5% turnout. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an important message to remember when the neighborhood councils feel like, why aren't we getting more turnout? Why aren't we doing more outreach? Well, sadly, I think that's to some extent endemic in our democracy, sad to say.
What about the congressional race, Ms. Hahn's race? Is that the same 5.5?
Oh, I'll have to consult the Registrar Recorder's website to see what that.
I'd like to see what that percentage was, because that was a congressional seat. So, neighborhood council seat, congressional seat. See if there's apathy all across the board or just in certain areas.
Mr. Krikorian, if I may.
Yes.
Mr. Zine brought up an interesting point that this proposal on tying neighborhood council elections to municipal elections on its face appears like such a panacea. People have to go to vote anyway, and so why not take care of it all at the same time? A couple of things. We will apply our analysis to it, and we will be very truthful in laying out the pros and cons. But we admittedly have immediate things that jump to mind. Precisely as you said, Mr. Krikorian, the fact that neighborhood council borders do not coincide with precinct borders, do not coincide with council districts. The fact that there's one set of number of folks that are registered to vote when potentially every human being in the city of Los Angeles could be a potential voter in a neighborhood council election.
Or not even in the city of Los Angeles, if you're a stakeholder.
Correct. So it's immensely complex. The concept of housing a Labrador with an owl in the same place. They have different feeding habits. They have different needs, and I don't know if it would be fair to the Labrador or to the owl to keep them and treat them the same.
And they have an equal right to vote.
They do. So I'm just saying we will apply analysis and we will be very fair, but the logistics are staggering, and the potential for additional resources would be quite staggering. Okay,
thank you. Thank you very much. We will revisit this. And then finally, that leaves us with item number 4. Chappelle.
Item number 4 is a verbal discussion relative to the amount of funding available for neighborhood councils and description of the encumbrance process by the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
All right, Mr. Kim, in the latest, in the budget that was approved by the council, the funding program for neighborhood councils included a reduction of approximately 10% in the annual funding program that was roughly consistent with reductions that had been seen in departments throughout the city. But there was a fair amount of discussion and even confusion about the rollovers and the encumbrance policy. So if you could just kind of give an overview of where we stand with that now, and then we'll move on to public comment.
Correct. And the difference between rollover and encumbrance has been confusing within the city. So if even we are confused, neighborhood councils would be easily confused as well. But the rollover policy basically allows neighborhood councils to carry over any unspent money from prior fiscal years to the next fiscal year. The standing policy before the council recently took action was that neighborhood councils could keep up to $100,000 at the end of any fiscal year, and then after that, the new year's allocation would be added on to that. So we were allowing neighborhood councils to do that. The encumbrance procedure in the city is easier to understand for city departments because they have ability to say encumber contracted amounts of funds that they could then use to reserve for the next fiscal year. Neighborhood councils have not had a uniform and clear encumbrance policy. There are some neighborhood councils who are under the impression that because a board has taken a board action to commit some public funds, that therefore constitutes an obligation on the city's part to pay that expense. How we have defined the encumbrance policy for purposes of preparing for this council decision around eliminating the rollover is to say that every year the department has a cutoff date of April 15th for all demand warrants. Demand warrants are what neighborhood councils have to submit to the department that meets controller guidelines for the spending of public funds. It includes such things as board motions, board actions to approve funds. There are certain documentation that sort of vendors have to fulfill, like the BTRC or a W-9 and tax papers. We received roughly $1.4 million in demand warrant requests in response to the April 15th deadline. We also rejected about 30% of the demand warrants because they were not completely filled out. We returned those rejected neighborhood demand warrants, gave them a second chance of May 9th to say, this is incomplete, it's not going to get approved by the controller, and you have another chance. We didn't receive that many responses. We received maybe 40% of responses to that second deadline. We're also issuing the last and final deadline of May 31st for those, only for those neighborhood councils who submitted incomplete demand warrants by the April 15th deadline. So I think we are allowing neighborhood councils, because of this unprecedented council action in response to the fiscal crisis, we're saying that we understand that these are funds that are important for your communities, and we're going to give you every chance to submit the paperwork correctly. Neighborhood councils also have purchase cards. They're allowed to spend up to $2,500 per transaction, and there is a limit that we place on the purchase cards per quarter. That is mainly a budget management tool. It's not a ceiling, because there are some neighborhood councils that don't know what their remaining balances are. So it's our way of making sure that they don't overspend their public funding allocation, because that would cause major problems for the department as well as the city. Neighborhood councils have been basically doubling their rate of spending on the purchase card in anticipation of the rollover policy decision. And they have until June 15th to spend on their purchase card, after which we have a blackout period of about 3 weeks for the next fiscal year, and we'll open it up in July 5th. And that's basically to resolve all remaining accounts and records. What our goal is to make sure that expenses incurred in that fiscal year are paid with funds from that fiscal year. Our accounting systems haven't been set up adequately to do that, but in an effort to make sure that we're all on the same page with neighborhood councils and the city, we're going to do that. So we'll also...
And if I may, on that point,
yes,
that is true of every single city department, right? I mean, that is part of the fiscal policy of the city, that current year budget funds are spent for current budget year expenses.
correct.
Okay.
That's right. And we're going to do our best to make sure that we do that by encumbering funds that are for routine expenses like office rent. A lot of neighborhood councils use temporary help like bookkeepers and minute keepers. And those are regular expenses that we can predict, and so we'll set aside those funds to make sure that we're honoring all the bills that we have to pay. Because I anticipate a lot of complaints from neighborhood councils, and rightly so, that, you know, why are you paying for this year's expenses with next year's allocation? So we're going to try to do that as well. So it's been a major effort. I want to thank our staff. Tanita Larios is the funding program manager, and this was an all-hands-on-deck project, and even the field staff have been involved in spending quite a bit of time responding to the unprecedented demand for the workload that was generated. So I want to thank the staff and acknowledge their work during this process. But I think we're going to get through it with as much openness and transparency regarding the funds as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Zine? All right. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. That brings us to public comment. And again, we are, if every card that I have takes 2 minutes, we are now 30 minutes over schedule for this meeting. So if there's something that somebody else has already said, don't feel like you need to occupy the entire 2 minutes, if necessary, but of course you're welcome to it if you'd like. First card I have is from Commissioner Lux. Linda Lux, if you'd come forward, and then following Commissioner Lux will be Lisa Sarkin.
I'll pass. Just for public comment.
Bless you, Lisa. So, but you do have another card in for general public comment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm here both as a member of the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners representing President Abrams, who couldn't be here, sends his regards, and I'm president of the Venice Neighborhood Council, so I have two hats. I want to start with the disaster preparedness piece, since you took that first and it's separate than the other three. Obviously, the neighborhood councils are the perfectly positioned to be the first responders and have been at the Metro crash and also the Chatsworth-Sylmar fires. So to have us trained, those of us that are willing to, it's a logical network. I think you were right, Councilman Zine. We need to be trained. Many of us are already doing it. My neighbor council had a workshop on Saturday for disaster preparedness. We have a very active team. And one thing is we were asked by the Red Cross to do a pilot program in Venice with them, and we were told by the city attorney that we couldn't, that we had to wait for the city to do its own thing, which was very confusing, yeah. But I don't think mandating the city to do it is the way to go. I agree with that. Nobody likes to be mandated, but definitely using this as an opportunity, I think you'd get a lot of cooperation, both from city members and the public. So we don't think, given the cuts in the neighborhood councils this year and the loss of the rollover funds and the not having the elections, we should be asked to pay for it. CERT training is free. I think that should be the city's responsibility. But we definitely want to participate, and that's definitely the likely way to go. Now, back to 1, 2, 4, and 5, I'll put them all together the way you did. The consensus of everyone that I've spoken to is that 2014 is way too long to wait. We ran for 2-year terms, and the neighborhood councils will lose a lot of people if we wait for 4 years. I just think that's, on the other hand, having it tied to city elections, if that were possible, makes the most sense, but I understand the maps are not consistent and the boundaries don't jive, so I don't know how that would be done, but 2013, may I continue?
Yes.
In the calendar year, if it could be in 2013, one way or the other, I think that would solve a lot of problems for us as neighbor council members who don't want to be 4 years in terms and just the general tone of it. Then the rollover cuts for ours, really, the way it was presented at such a last minute, my neighbor council and others had to scurry around. It's really unfortunate that people are having to spend money quickly finding things. Our neighbor council had a really good program that it was structured wrong and we didn't have enough advance warning. That was the only problem. We won't do that again. And then finally, at our May 16th meeting, the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners, this is regarding factual basis stakeholders, we passed a recommended policy that both to ensure neighborhood factual basis stakeholders had a place at the table and to protect the neighborhood councils from being taken over by factual basis stakeholders. We passed a policy that is already being used as models in Woodland Hills, in Tarzana, and in Venice to have one or more factual basis stakeholder seats. Venice has one, others have more, that factual basis stakeholders can vote for, so that we have one factual basis stakeholder seat. Our policy said 1 or 10%, at least one factual basis stake or 10%, and we think that's a good model for the city to follow, and that's our recommended policy. Thank you for
very
the
much.
extra time.
All right. Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, followed by Judy Price.
Council members, thank you. So real quickly, regarding CERT, Encino is actually in the middle of a 6-week Monday night CERT training. There are many neighborhood councils that do that. However, keep the following in mind. Many of the people who attend CERT are folks from the community. They're not neighborhood council board members. Some neighborhood council board members probably don't have the physical. So I think with this, it's great that the neighborhood council be the leaders on this, but the people who are going to be on that team are mostly going to come from the community, and we should encourage that. And what I think would be really helpful is if we could find out how many neighborhood councils and at what level and how many, not just board members, but folks from each of the communities. If we could get that within the boundaries of each neighborhood council, that would be a valuable information for both you and for us to have throughout the city. Regarding elections, I don't know what the council did with regards to the money that originally was in there for independent election administrators. I thought there was a small amount of money, like $20,000 or something, if that got eliminated. But that, to me, seemed to be a good option to go so that we could preserve the opportunity for elections at very, very modest costs, where we do all the work, and yet it's still supervised as it is in the ordinance by city clerk via the independent election administrators. They would train them, they would oversee them, but we would do the elections. That we didn't have to wait, we could do it next year. And lastly, regarding the funding, there is a lot of confusion because over the last 3 years it's been done 3 different ways. And my interpretation of encumbrances was that the neighborhood council voted by a motion of its board to encumber monies for specified projects, very specific, the dollar amount and the vendor, without necessarily having to put in a demand warrant by April 15th. In other words, we should be allowed to use this year's money up through hopefully June 30th, or pretty darn close to that, by simply voting it, because we've been able to do that before by action of the city council. So now we're holding ex post facto, April 15th or purchase card, and I think that you should make a distinction between encumbrances and rollovers.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Judy Price, followed by Dr. Williams.
Okay, I'm only going to speak on one issue, although I'm going to take 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about the elections. We keep changing the rules on the elections, and I think Mr. Kim said it very properly. The neighborhood councils should be treated as partners. Every single election I've been involved with since the beginning has had different rules. To delay the elections for another 2 years is simply not fair. We're going to end up with a board that is all by appointment because people are dropping out already, and we aren't even at the two-year mark. 4 years? I didn't sign up for 4 years. Nobody did. It's simply not fair. Let the neighborhood councils have the elections back. It will cost a lot less to go to 13? No, 14. When would it be? 12, 14. I mean, keep the rules. You've changed the rules on about everything over the last 10 years with neighborhood councils. We need a consistent policy, and we need to know what we can count on. But to have 4-year terms, I mean, that's just not fair. I mean, you got to have, we are volunteers. We don't get paid. If I got paid for this, I might stay another 2 years, but we don't get paid. We're volunteers. We work very hard. We take it very seriously. But, you know, you're like playing us like puppets here. Please don't hold the elections off, please.
Okay, thank you. Just for clarification, I think that the fact that this budget does not assume funding for the elections doesn't imply that elections need to be postponed until 2014.
Well, let the neighborhood
City
councils-
clerk-operated elections were designed to be performed in even-numbered years so that they would be offset by the municipal elections.
Well, but many
that
of us
doesn't
don't want the
necessarily-
city clerk to do the elections
Exactly
anyway.
my point. So if
But
that
if the neighborhood councils can do it, but you see, you have to give us the mechanism to be able to do it because the rules don't allow it now.
Okay,
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Clyde Williams, followed by Joanne Ivanic Garb. And as I call your name, just please come on up to the table. Dr. Williams.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, LA 32 Neighborhood Council Board Member. Basically, no on number one, no on number two. Because last year when we had our elections, the clerk did it and nobody participated because there was no buy-in to it. The entire board basically had to be almost appointed. I think there were about 8 people that were actually elected. So we're quite concerned about any, might say, interference, participation by the city clerk, because it just signs it off and everybody forgets. Whereas if it has to be budgeted, if it has to be delegated, you have to have a committee, et cetera, it's almost as bad as bylaws. So we have a great deal of opposition to either the city clerk doing it as indicated in the draft bylaws that were circulated, or by having it associated with the municipal elections, because it just doesn't work. There's too many things going on. For number 4, I've seen it too many times that nobody knows what to do with the money until the very end. So I would say encumbrances, yeah, if it's been voted by the committee, by the budget committee, by the board, it should be considered. But it should be spent within a reasonable period of time, say not more than 1 quarter after the closing of the books. So there should be some lack of carryover, because we're there to get that money into the community and get the community working. If we don't get the money in, it doesn't work. Regarding number 3, CERT, no. I'd prefer to see the money go to neighborhood watches, which have much more universal coverage, doesn't require as much training, and brings the neighborhoods together so that then they can provide input to the neighborhood councils. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next speaker is Joanne Ivanic Garb, followed by Leonard Schaefer. Mr. Schaefer, if you could come on up.
Joanne Yvanek-Garb, West Hills Neighborhood Council. Thank you very much. We have a very close relationship with Fire Station 106, which is on Roscoe, south side of the street, so it's in your district.
Roscoe and Fallbrook.
Yes. And because of the Topanga fire, we're very aware. This was in our neighborhood, the Topanga fire. So 2 years ago, in 2009, we offered a CERT training class, and we had 60 people show up for the first class. It dwindled down to about 45 by the end of the session, but this was, we had 10 of our board members participate in the study. I had 4 of my family members participate in the training, and we had it at West Valley Christian Church. They donated the premises to us. The only thing we had to pay for was the water, and our trainer, Mitch, was wonderful. We also just had an emergency preparedness fair on April 23rd, which was attended by between 5,000 to 6,000 people that came to see different areas. So we're very aware, and we haven't signed up. My husband and I haven't signed up for the call-out, but that's just because we haven't signed up. In our area, we have a factual basis, and we're very happy with our description of what a stakeholder is. Also with the demand warrants, as long as I've been on neighborhood council, I've yet to figure out what the heck is going on as to what gets paid and what doesn't get paid. We just had something paid that it took 3 years for us to get a check for, and that wasn't right. So we really need to have a better definition of what's an encumbrance and what's not an encumbrance. We feel that an encumbrance is something that we voted on, that went through all the committees, came to the board. We had a formal resolution made, and we committed to that money. So we, as a city entity, we look pretty darn bad if we don't stand behind our word. And also, in answer to your question, I was an election precinct officer. I was an inspector with 2 precincts. We had 1,500 people on my roster. 23 people showed up for that election. Okay. The other precinct had 1,000. They had 12.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Schaefer, followed by Doug Epperhart.
Good afternoon. Leonard Schaefer, Tarzana Neighborhood Council, speaking on my own today. First, I'll go to 1, 2, and 5 with regards to elections. Under the charter, who owns neighborhood council elections? I would contend neighborhood councils own their elections with a duty to be assisted by some organization that used to be done. That's been transferred by 514 to the clerk. Does that mean that we cannot conduct our own election or selection? I do not believe so. I believe we have the right to do that and should be given the right to do that. With regards to holding them with municipal elections, I would be totally against that. 1, because of precinct and other boundaries. 2nd, because is there some problem with the Voting Rights Act when you're getting different definitions going on? And lastly, what does the charter say about other things occurring during a municipal election when they're being conducted? So we'd have to consider that. With regards to factual basis stakeholder, while I'd like to see it go away, I don't think it's going to go away, but I believe both the City Council and the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners have the ability to define a factual basis stakeholder. I think attempting to get all neighborhood councils to change their bylaws is going to be very difficult. So probably a definition, at least to begin with, would work a whole lot better in setting that up. Getting to encumbrance or rollover, city departments have ability to enter into multi-year projects. Neighborhood councils must have some way of doing that. We just spent $50,000 in Tarzana planting trees. The only way we were able to do that on the boulevard was by using multi-year funds in conjunction with Million Trees. We couldn't enter into a multi-year contract with them. So we have to have some mechanism. Last but not least, with regards to CERT. I think CERT is wonderful. I've gone through CERT training. But if we figure that there's just 25 average number of board members per what is about to be 95 neighborhood councils, you're going to have to get 2,300 and some odd people trained, whether they want to or not. It's got to be every year, and basic training isn't where you stop. You've got to keep going up. So I would say it's a wonderful thing to ask us to do, but not mandated.
Thank you very much. Doug Epperhart, followed by Bob Gelfand.
Okay, thank you, council members. Doug Epperhart, Coastal San Pedro. I'll confine my remarks to the elections. And let me say to you that a number of us who were involved with the election task force have had various discussions, primarily with Dunn, about going forward and how to come up with answers that involve a process that's transparent and inclusive, so that decisions with regard to these elections are not made by bureaucrats sitting around in a conference room somewhere where they're going to come back and tell us what we're going to do. So what we're proposing is getting the election task force rolling again so that we can work with City Clerk, Dunn, your office, and anybody else that wants to deal with some specific matters. And that would be these. I believe that there are three really critical issues that are involved with neighborhood council elections, selections, whatever you want to call it. One is the casting of votes. Who does it, how they do it, who's qualified to do it. That's the first issue that no matter what we do, we have to deal with. Second issue is the counting of those votes. Again, who does it, how it's guaranteed that it is honest and transparent. And finally, a big, big issue for neighborhood councils, and that's outreach. That is something that isn't part of a normal election process because of campaigns. Well, we don't have that in our neighborhood council system, so we have to rely on the councils themselves or Dunn or the clerk or somebody. But that is the third critical component. Finally, we have to have the ability to run elections on an annual basis. 2 years is about the term that anyone's willing to commit to, and a lot of councils like to do alternate year elections so that they elect half the board one year, half the next year. So I think annual elections are something we absolutely have to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bob Gelfand, followed by Alexis Tehran.
Thank you. What Doug just said, the election task force reported to your committee at great length in the joint meeting, and we continue to be willing and now eager to restart the process. There's a couple of issues. One is if we were to have what we would call a selection by means of a town hall forum on a yearly basis, how does that differ from an election? What sort of balloting can we do? And that's why we want the city attorney involved in this election task force meeting. The second question is really critical. What is the time frame that you would like to have answers back and you're willing to participate through your staff and others and yourself in terms of getting answers to these questions? But we think it's a good idea because we have a lot more time than 45 minutes to go into things like the factual basis stakeholder in great detail. Personally, I believe that was, speaking of the factual basis stakeholder, a mistake to force it upon all neighborhood councils and the way that it was done. And my personal view, and I believe that of the bylaws task force, which voted unanimously to ask that it be withdrawn, the factual basis stakeholder mandate, is that neighborhood councils on an individual basis should be able to come up with some rational extension of the lives, works, and owns property, and many have, including my own, and we have made it work, and it works nicely. So that's basically where we are. I'd like simply to point out that at the city level, you have lots of factual basis stakeholders. They're called lobbyists. But you don't give them a seat on the city council. You listen to them, which is very important. But they have a seat at the table in the sense of they get a chance to
give their testimony, and talk to you. That's what a factual basis stakeholder is. We have them too, and we listen to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And when I was talking earlier about all the extensive discussion that we've had and the outreach that we've had on this issue, I should have mentioned the great work that the Elections Task Force has done. I mean, this was a lot of labor and a lot of discussion that you all did. That
I'm sorry,
added
can I take 10
considerably.
seconds on CERT? The LAPD has a senior lead officer program, which works very well. There's nothing to stop the fire department from sending their own reps to neighborhood councils, recruiting people, because I think you need at least 4,000, 5,000, 10,000 CERT people.
Thank you. No, you can't have more time, but there you go. You already took it. So, all right. The next speaker is Alexis Tehran, followed by Carlene Davis. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Alexis Tehran. I'm on the board of the Greater Cypress Park Neighborhood Council. One point that was made earlier by Mr. Bongwan Kim, it's really everyone's concern to talk to everyone in a more modified manner, as you will, such as involving the neighborhood councils and its partners, because it's true that none of us like to be told. And then remember, we are volunteers. We don't get paid. Some of us do it because we just want to do it. And it's very difficult to get people involved. Now, you are elected, but you've got the loot to go out there and say, please elect me. I'm going to do blah, blah, whatever for you. So it's easier for the elected officials to do that. And then even though you do have the money to do that, and no more people than we do, and have more resources, you still get elected, some of you, by a few hundred. So therefore, it's not the same. So again, if we communicate with each other, it works out much better. And then I believe in the CERT program. I took it 100 years ago. But that's me. And of course, it depends on people who are involved and interested in certain things that they will do it. But we really should try to look into that much further. And I did make a point with my councilman. Japan has a form of information, and we all know what happens in Japan. They only have, I believe, either half a minute or 1 minute to inform people on cell phones, and they do. So, but that will be only people who have cell phones. They send them a message that this is going to happen, and so they have time, some of them, to take cover, for example. If you're going to go into an elevator, you don't go. Okay, but that's one thing. And I don't know how many of you remember, maybe one or two. When I was a kid, because of the war, alarms went out all over the city. Why can't we have a similar program here, such as that? I still see those contraptions in the city. And one more point, if I may. Let me see. Why can't the firefighters volunteer like the rest of us do, sir? They get a lot of money for their time, and why can't one or two or half a dozen go out and do the training for us? And we need it on a regular basis. They use it all the time. We don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Davis, welcome, followed by Jay Bieber and Joe Banks-Broad.
Very quickly, I agree that the election task force should continue to engage in this issue, but would like to encourage the leadership to conduct more outreach so there's a little bit more diversity regionally, and also in terms of neighborhood councils that might not have the same capacity, but that they be asked to participate in these conversations, because that is a learning experience. Two, elections are very important, but I think we also need to focus some of this discussion on the outreach that leads to the election, that issue is just as important. And three, want us to also think about the implications of the postponement to the system as a whole. So meaning if we move forward and you have some neighborhood councils doing selection methods, some neighborhood councils doing an appointment, and everyone's doing it all at the same time, what are the implications of that for the system as a whole?
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jay Bieber. Is he still here, Joe? Okay, I'll hold him on the table and invite you up then, if I could, followed by Ivan Spiegel.
Good afternoon. I'm Jill Banks-Barad, and I'm here representing the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, where I'm president, and also the Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. I want to talk to you about two things. One are the encumbrances. And we feel that the April 15th deadline was an arbitrary deadline for us to spend money, turn in our demand warrants. And those of us that were frugal and thoughtful and wanted to research projects are now being penalized because we can't spend that money. And I know that you as city council persons, you don't spend money that way. You research and look at what you want to spend money on. And I think that we should be given either rollovers or some process for encumbrances so that we can spend the money. The next thing are the elections. The Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils voted unanimously, that's all 34 neighborhood councils, not to have the city clerk do the elections. I'm sure that they were successful in some parts of the city, but in the Valley, it was overwhelmingly they were unhappy with the city clerk. And I think there were several reasons. One, there was no outreach that was promised to us. We didn't get that. The other thing is that it was overstaffed, but the most egregious problem was that the city clerk's office did not abide by the individual neighborhood council's election rules and regulations. And in my neighborhood council of Sherman Oaks, people actually left because they were told the incorrect things about who could vote for what candidate. Now, I would like to offer a kind of looking outside the box. If we go with your idea to delay, because to save money, delay the elections for next year, and we go into the muni cycle of 2013, then why can't we have voting day in LA and get people used to that? You're voting for, may I finish? If you're voting for your city offices, you would vote for your neighborhood councils as well. But they don't have to be on the same ballot, and it doesn't have to be done by the city clerk. It's just do it on the same day and get people. I think you'll get a much bigger turnout that way, and I think going to 2014 is just too long to wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spiegel,
Yes.
followed by Mary Garcia.
Okay. My name is Ivan Spiegel. I'm the parliamentarian at the Venice Neighborhood Council. I'm co-chair of the Bylaws Resource Team. I was on the election task force, so I've been around here. The thing about the elections, it comes down to who's going to pay for it. The previous speaker made a comment about we were betrayed because of the outreach. The city clerk came in originally with a $4 million proposal. It was going to cut us to $11,000 each, and we made a deal saying, let us do the outreach, cut the money. So people are not remembering that. The final agreement was they weren't going to do the outreach, we were. In terms of the tying this in with the municipal elections, there's one big hurdle, and I'm a poll inspector. I've been working for the clerk and the county registrar for years. When you walk into a poll, unless you're a brand new voter, we are not supposed to ask you for ID. You're supposed to affirm your name, your address, you sign the book under penalty of perjury, you vote. You have to be a citizen, okay? Now, you have the neighborhood council, we want you to affirm. We want you to say who you are, why you're a stakeholder, show ID. So you have a big problem there tying those two things together. In terms of the money, the encumbrances, what you're doing is not necessarily a bad thing. We want to know the rules at the beginning of the game. You can't wait till the top of the ninth inning and saying, oh, guess what? Now you can't carry your rollover. All right? Tell us now. Tell us at the beginning of July, these are going to be the rules for this year. No rollover for next year. You have to spend the money by this date. Let us know what we're dealing with so we can act responsibly. There's been a feeding frenzy around the city. He already said he's got 1,000 demand warrants. He's sitting there. The financial statements aren't getting done because of this. All right? Please, you've got to let us know what we're doing. Last thing about factual basis real quickly. I don't have a problem with it. Please do stuff to prevent takeovers. It's happened already, and it will happen big time at the next election if you don't put some cap on it. All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is Mary Garcia, and Jill, if you wouldn't mind checking if Jay's available. He's next and the last one before general public comment. Ms. Garcia.
Mary Garcia, Midtown North Hollywood Neighborhood Council, and I'll try to be really quick. I think we should give the elections back to the neighborhood councils. We did them just fine. As a matter of fact, we had bigger turnout because we actually went out and met the people. This time we had planned on some help from the city clerk, which didn't happen. So there were very few people for us. The CERT programs, I totally agree that we are the right people to be taking this. As a matter of fact, I had to go to Burbank to take mine because there weren't any happening in my area. But what we are doing with my neighborhood councils, we're purchasing 50 backpacks, CERT bags. And it's not just for the board members, because you're not going to get 23 board members to do that. But what we're doing is we're going to encourage the stakeholders, and we already have several. You're giving us a backpack too? And I said, yeah. I said, and it's, you've got all the necessary tools for a beginning CERT person. So that's an encouragement, and I think we should go forward with that. Factual stakeholder, I disagree with that. I did months whenever ago. I don't think we need to do that. I don't want it. And furthermore, we have such fluctuation with boards. You can have 15 people on that board, and all of a sudden you get down to just above a majority vote. And so if you have 10% or whatever it is, 20%, it's not going to work for what it was intended to do by percentage. So I think that should be out. If you're going to do that, have one max, but I still disagree that you should have any at all. And I tried to be quick, and I gave you some time back.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Our final speaker on the agenda items is Jay Bieber, and then we'll proceed with general public comment, starting with Dr. Williams.
Hi, Jay Bieber, Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council. Just very briefly, regarding the idea of keeping the neighborhood councils as a partner in this process, we would definitely like the opportunity to have some time to digest the clerk's report once it's brought back and ready before it comes to this committee. There may even be a necessity for the council to vote on a position or certain things like that. We meet once a month, and that has to sort of be taken into consideration. So just in terms of as quickly as we could get that in advance, as opposed to a day or two before, would make it very difficult for us to respond appropriately and as one voice in terms of a council. Also regarding the CERT training, just to reiterate a lot of what everybody else has said, keeping that voluntary is a great idea. I'm interested in doing it. I know a number of other people on our council are interested in doing it, and if the city can encourage and facilitate that, that would be great, and that's what we're in favor of.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Just on the point of getting advance notice, there has mentioned before, as I mentioned before, there's been an extensive amount of analysis that the clerk has already done, that the elections task force has done, and so on. There is a body of work out there, much of which, if not all of which, is available, I think, on our website. So I would encourage anyone who has an interest in further work on this issue to check out our website and see what has been done. I'm sure that will be supplemented with further work, but at least that'll give you a head start.
Thank you.
Thank you. General public comment. Our first speaker is Dr. Williams, followed by Lisa Sarkin, and then batting cleanup will be Jill Banks-Broad.
Dr. Clyde Williams, LA 32 Neighborhood Council. What do? We're neighborhood councils. We do little things like neighborhood watches, public safety, graffiti removal, fire hydrant repainting, farmers markets, potholes, community gardens, illegal dumping, illegal recycling, illegal vendors. We try to do a whole bunch of things that should be done by the council districts. However, we want to participate. We try. So what do we wind up doing? We wind up being not told about things going on in public works, not being involved in the Department of Water and Power. The memorandum of understanding is a joke with DWP. The other departments blow us off. So when you say empowerment, neighborhood empowerment, wow, that sounds good, but it's something like some of the elections. City clerk gives an election, nobody attends. Well, if we don't get empowered through our council districts to the other departments, how can we really help? It took us 4 months to find out that the DWP would provide us with paint to paint fire hydrants, take the graffiti off. Why? Because a couple of people in our beautification committee wanted to make our neighborhood look better. That's all. We provide the labor. Now DWP formally provides us with the paint. So it can work, but it's a matter of getting Public Works, Department of Water and Power, LADOT, to involve and empower the neighborhood councils. So that's it.
Thank you. Lisa Sarkin, followed by Joe Banks-Brad.
Lisa Sarkin, Studio City Neighborhood Council. I just wanted to remind the committee that our parking passes are going to expire June 30th. And as far as we heard, we don't know that anybody's working on it, and we were only allotted one, which is really very, very difficult to use. So I'm hoping that somebody's going to be working on that, so we will be able to get them by June 30th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill Banks-Broad, Valley Alliance of Neighborhood Councils. Well, we didn't work together, but I want to talk about the parking passes. I think it's one more thing, council members, that is really a slap in the face to neighborhood councils. The charter says that we're supposed to advise the city government, and we're here at committee hearings, we come to the city council, and now we would like a parking pass. And I don't think that's asking too much. When we first started, we got 3. Then we were told, no, we're not going to get any. And we raised a fuss, and they said, okay, we'll give you 1. Now we're told we're not going to get any. And the reason seems to change. Today's reason, the reason du jour, is that because it's Homeland Security. Several months ago, we were told we couldn't get a parking pass because the city's fleet of cars were parked in the parking lot and there was no room for us. So I don't know what tomorrow's reason is going to be, but I don't believe it's the Homeland Security. And I think it's a lack of respect for those of us that travel to City Hall. And I'm asking this committee, would you please look into why we can't get parking passes? They say, it's just as easy, you can get it, just call up your city council person. But that means calling up, getting somebody on the phone, giving them the make of your car and all that's required. As we have a parking pass, you just put it there and they let you in. I don't think it's asking too much, and I think it's very symbolic to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so since that's not an agenda item, and we can't discuss that here as part of our committee meeting under the Brown Act, I am going to suggest that after I conclude this meeting, which will be in 30 seconds, I'd like to invite Mr. Kim, if he wishes to stick around for a minute and address the issue of parking passes, just give an update on where you stand with that after the meeting concludes. Thank you for all of your comments, and thank you for your indulgence. I'm sorry if this seemed rushed, but we did have a lot of comment on agenda items that we're not going to have any action on, and we will be revisiting these at the next meeting. So thank you all very much for being here, and that concludes this meeting. We're adjourned.